Hello and welcome to another pen video from me, Penultimate Dave. So I have another 10 pens currently inked up today. I think let's just go through these briefly one by one. We'll go through them in a little bit more detail and then we'll do a writing sample. So from left to right we have a Bennu hexagon-b, a Bennu Brielle Yolanda, a Bennu Minima Magma, a Visconti Camelot, a Visconti Jacques de Malay, and this is the last template edition. We have a Mont Extra 1930 Shiny Lines Dove. We have a Visconti Homo Sapiens Corsani 90, a Visconti Corsani Octagonal, a Visconti Wall Street, and we have the Mythic Pens Aeschylus. So I think let's go through these in a little bit more detail. So Bennu has been on my radar for quite some time. I have actually tried a couple of Bennu pens over the last couple of years. I have honestly found them on a little bit on the small side for me, although I have been changing the way that I sort of see my pens. And a small pen normally I find is a pen that will create a little bit more of a hand grip, but some of these Bennus I'm finding actually quite comfortable, and I'm actually changing my view on some of these smaller pens. So this is the hexagon, and you can see here that this has a hexagon sort of pattern going throughout the body here and the cap, and it has a base colour of like a blue and a purple and a blurple, and you then have this glitter that is also impregnated sort of under the surface there, so there's a lacquer that goes on top. And I have to say that this really is a beautiful pen, and I have actually fallen in love with this hexagon, to be honest. It is a really nice pen. The only thing that I'm not so keen on is it has a number 5 size Schmidt nib, and the nib, I tend to prefer number 6 size nibs. Now, in terms of posting the cap, I can post the cap, and I can also hold the sort of pen up a little bit higher on the threads here, because I do find that the smaller the pens, the narrower the sections, and the smaller the nibs, and I tend not to like small sections because it does, or thin sections, because it does cause me some hand cramp when I write for long, lengthy writing sessions. But for me, this I can write with, and I can write with it for a very long time. And this, I have to say, in this colour, in this pattern, I really do like. So I have this one currently inked up. Now, these Bennus are actually on loan to me from Derek at Stonecott Fine Writing Supplies. So I'd like to thank Derek for loaning me these Bennu pens. And if you want to check these out, go and check these out at Stonecott Fine Writing Supplies. The next pen I have inked up today is the Bennu Brielle, and this is the Yolanda. And I am a little bit of a sucker for purple coloured pens and inks, and I say inks, I don't have a huge amount of purple inks. I think I have around about 16 or 18. But this is a beautiful colour, and so this is the Brielle Yolanda, and again, like, this is a sort of diamond faceted sort of pen, and it has this blue and purple base colour with some sort of like chips going on in there, some flakes, and then of course you have this beautiful glitter that's again under the surface, so you can see there that glitter as it shines. It's not it's not on top. There's a lacquer on top of the glitter, so you cannot feel that glitter. Now, the Briellettes you cannot post, unfortunately. They're not designed to post. So this, for me, is a little bit of a more shorter pen, but I do still like it. Now the step down is a little bit larger for me, so I do kind of feel that a little bit more if I'm writing with it and I'm holding it up more on the threads here. And again, it comes with a number 5 Schmidt nib. This one is a fine nib. The previous one here on the hexagon was a broad nib, but they do write very well. And then I have a Bennu Minima Magma, and this is the smallest Bennu that I've actually tried, and it is what I would almost class as a pocket pen, and I'm sure many of you would not class that as a pocket pen. However, for me, when I have a pen this size, this really is a pocket pen to me. And but again, I like this. I don't normally go for black pens. I do have some black pens, but I think what sets this out is this lovely sort of red and goldy, sort of almost rose goldy glitter that's going on there in that body. And again, it's lacquered over the top, so you don't get to feel it. Now, this is quite a small pen for me, especially if I hold it up here on the threads, because I do find these sections with the number 5 Schmidt nibs a little bit on the thin side. I'm sure a lot of people like these, but for me, I'm used to a more girthier section, almost like this. So for me, when I have my fingers touching here, I tend not to like it so much. So I tend to hold it up a little bit higher. Now, again, this cannot be posted, so as much as I really like how this writes, it's a beautiful broad nib. I just wish it was a little larger for my hand, because I do have a little bit more of an issue with hand cramp with smaller, sort of shorter pens and thinner section pens. I still don't quite know why. I think most people tend to get it with more thicker section and longer, heavier pens. I, for some reason, get it on the opposite, and I know some people do. I think the majority of people get it on larger and thicker and heavier pens, but for me, I do sort of get more hand cramp on smaller pens. But this is a beautiful pen, and if you like small pens, this is a really, really nice pen to write with. And then I have my trusty Visconti Camelot, and I absolutely love this pen. It's obviously in a completely different class of prices compared to the Bennus, but the amount of work and effort that goes into making this Visconti is absolutely stunning, and it's not a cheap pen, but for me it's absolute work of art. And I think that's why I like a lot of these Viscontis, because they really are a work of art, and that's a number 6 size nib, and it's a medium nib, and it's an 18 karat gold nib as well. So I have that one inked up, and strangely enough that does not post either, even though it's a much longer pen. Strangely enough, I do find that this section is a little bit on the thinner side, so I tend to, where it goes concave, I tend to hold it a little bit higher up on the threads here, and I don't feel those threads. They're very shallow threads, but I absolutely love writing with this nib. It's a gorgeous medium nib to write with, and one of the original older 18 karat gold nibs that the Visconti used to have on their pens. And then I have this one, which is probably its sibling or big brother, and this is the Visconti, the Last Templar edition, Jacques de Malay. Jacques de Malay was the Last Templar, and this is a fitting pen. I'm not really into religion too much, or massively into history, although I do like a lot of the medieval, sort of going back through the history. Like the Camelot as well, but for me this pen is again just a work of art here. The amount of detail on here, the shields, the chainmail, it's a different kind of chainmail design to what the Camelot is, but this is a beautiful pen, and it's a very long pen as well. It's not a short pen. Like if I compared, say, this to effectively the Bennu Minima Magma, I said that this is a pocket pen. That's why I consider it a pocket pen, because it's a massive difference, and I kind of am used to writing with these Viscontis more than maybe a smaller Bennu like this. So for me, I'd say the Bennu is definitely a pocket pen to me, but I know many people would argue the case that it's not a pocket pen, and are much shorter pens than the Bennu. But this again has the Visconti Jacques de Malay has a number 6 size Visconti nib. It's a 23 cat palladium medium nib. I just love again how this writes. I love the pen, just like the Camelot. It's both of these two pens have a special place in my collection, and I know people ask me on a regular basis, will I part with this pen or will I part with that pen? And it's difficult because I never considered myself a collector, and not strictly a collector, but a sort of somebody that will collect all the pens in like a Visconti range or an Omos Arco range. But I have actually been seeing myself going that route more. But I don't collect every single pen. Like there are people out there that collect every single Twisby pen or every single Lamy pen, and that's just not me. So for me, I don't consider myself a collector, but I do have a collection of pens and a collection of some very nice pens, and these are pens that are rated highly in my collection. So when people say, will I sell these? It's all about the journey, about how much you like the pen, how much you like writing with the pen. And sometimes it holds other memories as well. So for me, these two are pens that rate very highly in my, I probably won't sell them at any point range. But I never say never. Like there are always times where you might want to sell a pen. And I guess it's the same with these four as well. I really do like stacked celluloid pens. So I have this one inked up this week. And this is the Montegrappa Extra 1930 Shiny Lines Dove. These are long sold out. These were a Goulet Pens exclusive. I managed to pick this up from Brian and Rachel as soon as it came out. It's a beautiful pen. It's got a number 8 size Montegrappa Dove nib on there. It's a medium nib. But this just really is a beautiful pen, and I absolutely love this stacked celluloid. So I have actually sort of, again, it's one of the pens that I do ink up a lot, and I probably would never let go of. But there are times where you probably will let go of them because you ultimately get bored with a pen or you change pens. Like I went down the route of getting a lot of stub nibs. Not early on in my collection, but probably around the midpoint of my sort of collecting. And I don't write a lot with them now. I am writing more with... I went to broads, and I'm typically going more towards mediums, and I'm even going towards fine nibs now. So I still can't get to extra fine. I still find extra fine nibs mostly too narrow and too fine for me. But this is the issue. So maybe some of the pens I have with stub nibs I will ultimately sell in the end. So that it's just how your collection evolves over time. The next pen here is a Visconti Homo Sapiens Corsani 90 that I have inked up. And again, unfortunately a long sold out pen. I bought this from Stefano. This was to commemorate his store, and it was the 90th year of his store. There were only 79 of these made, but 79 is, I believe, the number of the store on the street in Rome. It did originally have a medium nib. I've swapped it out for 1.3mm stub nib. I do like occasionally keep going back to these stub nibs, but it's not a nib that I will always write with now, whereas I used to actually write with them a lot. And I think the reason why I've gravitated from using stub nibs more is I would use them more in letters and write a lot of letters with stub nibs. And I would actually not use a 7mm ruling. I would write on Temuray River paper, and I would use around a 10 or 12mm ruling, which allowed me to write larger and actually write with a stub nib. More lately, I have been writing in A5 notebooks that typically have a 5mm ruling, And I've actually gravitated when writing letters to writing more smaller with a 5mm or 7mm ruling. So I'm getting used to writing smaller, which I never thought I could actually do because I typically was using a lot of broads and stub nibs. Then I have this pen inked up, and again, this is another Corsani, it's another Visconti, and this is the Corsani Octagonal, and again, another stacked celluloid pen, and this has a broad 23 cat palladium nib on there, but again, you can see in the size of my hand, and you can post these if you want to. They are a little bit long at that point, but again, stacked celluloid does have a special place in my heart and in my collection, and if I can add more stacked celluloid, I may do. I am still picky. I won't buy any pen that has stacked celluloid. I won't buy any Visconti that has stacked celluloid. So I am quite picky on what I will add to my collection. And then I have this one, and this is the Visconti Wall Street, and this again is another beautiful stacked celluloid. This has a 1.3mm stub nib there, and this writes beautifully well. So again, it's a pen that I like writing with a lot, and I like the 23 cat palladium nibs, and it's just again a beauty to write with. So I have that one inked up today or this week. And then I have this one, and this is a pen on loan from Den's Pens, and Den is a custom pen maker in the UK. This is actually made by Brad at Mythic Pens, and they have swapped these their pens around and sent each other their own pens, which actually I think is a really good idea. So pen makers shipping out pens to other pen makers and doing swaps. Beautiful idea. I think it gets to look at what other people's workmanship is doing to the pens, and gives them greater ideas to maybe improve how they make their own pens, or give them ideas on new models perhaps, or even material. And this is a really nice pen. So this is the Mythic Pens, the Aeschylus, and this is Brad is in the US, and he makes these. They come with a number 6 size Yovo nib. It's a cartridge converter pen, but again, this is a beautiful pen. So I have that one on loan, and that is inked up this week as well. So I think with that, let's go and do a writing sample. So the first pen is the Bennu hexagon-b. So we'll do an ink swatch here. Now, for me, and I guess this could be why I like this pen, this broad nib writes a lot broader. I'd almost say it's getting on to writing as a stub nib. It's quite wide. So this is the Bennu, and it's the hexagon-b, and it is a broad steel nib, as all of the Bennu nibs are. They're all steel nibs. I don't think they do any gold nibs, at least not yet anyway. And then the ink in here is Mont grappa, and it's violet, which is a nice sort of purple ink. The next pen is the Bennu Brielle Yolanda. So we'll do an ink swatch here. Now this is a much finer nib, and you can probably see that there. It's going to take a lot more colouring of that ink swatch to make that fully inked. So this is the Bennu, and it's a Brielle, and it's the Yolanda, and it is a fine steel nib. And the ink in here today is Diamine, Majestic, Purple. I do find that this nib is a very crisp nib. It's not scratchy in any way, but with a crisp metallic nib, you find that the nib is squared off. It's not a stub. So a stubbish type nib has rounded edges. So I find that this is a little bit crisp when you write with it. The next pen is the Bennu Minima Magma. So we'll do another ink swatch here. Now, this again is another broad nib, and I really have to say that I am in love with these Bennu broad nibs. They're Schmidt nibs, but they are really smooth and they don't have any problems hard starting or skipping. So this is the Bennu, and it's the Minima Magma, and it is a broad steel nib. Now these are all number 5 size nibs on the Bennus, not number 6 size. Now the ink in here today is Mont red. And I still find a little bit of a crispness to broads as well. So it's very, to me, like a crisp italic nib. So they are smooth to write, but the difference with a crisp italic is if you sort of go off slightly when you're writing, and I tend to tilt my nibs to the right a little bit more, you do find it sort of catching a little bit, and some people might say it's scratchy. It's not if you align the nib on the page correctly. It's just that they are, to me, ground very much like a crisp metallic. The next pen is the Visconti Camelot. So we'll do an ink swatch here. Now this is an 18 karat gold nib, and I like how this writes. It's quite a wet nib. So this is the Visconti Camelot, and it is a medium 18 karat gold nib. And then the ink in here is Mont Blanc, Lavender, Purple, which is actually quite a nice purple ink. It's not one of my favourite inks. I do find that, to me, Lavender is more of a paler purple, sort of almost like a violet. And I find this almost like a black purple. So, to me, I kind of don't associate this as being a lavender coloured ink myself. So that's maybe why I don't kind of like it as my favourite. Even though I do like dark purples, but this I find is a little bit more on the darker side. It does actually dry though, a little bit more lavender sort of like there. The next pen is the Visconti Jacques de Malay. So we'll do an ink swatch here. And this actually came as quite a dry writing nib. The tines were actually misaligned, but I corrected that, and now it's actually a lot more wetter of a nib. It's still not a fire hose nib. I've been thinking about actually making it a little bit more wetter myself, even more than it is now, but this is the Visconti Jacques de Malay. And it's actually quite wet writing. So for me, that's why I've not made it write any wetter. It's a medium, and it's a 23 karat palladium nib. And then the ink in here is Diamine Earl Grey. If you know me, you know I'm English, and you know most English people like their tea. And I like Twinings Earl Grey tea. I also like Lady Grey, and honestly, Diamine, if you're watching this, you need to make a Lady Grey tea. I'm sorry, but you do. I love drinking Earl Grey tea in the morning, and I tend to drink that all morning, and then I switch in the afternoon to an evening to Lady Grey tea. And I just find that the Lady Grey takes the edge off the Earl Grey a little bit, and it's a little bit more citrusy. So for me, I really want Diamine. I'm going to probably have to email Diamine and say, come on, guys, what's going on here? You need to make a Lady Grey tea. If any of you want to email them, by all means, email them as well. The next pen is the Mont Extra 1930 Shiny Lines Dove. So we'll do another ink swatch. And this is quite a wet nib. It's not a fire hose nib though, but it's quite a wet nib for me. So this is the Mont and it's the Extra 1930 Shiny Lines Dove, and I'm going to run out of space if I'm not careful. It's a medium and it's an 18 carat gold nib. I'm going to abbreviate the G for gold. And then the ink in here again is Diamine Earl Grey. And I just had to sort of do the piston on that one because it had been getting a little bit low on ink, so I did have to just ink it up a little bit there. The next pen is the Visconti Homo Sapiens Corsani 90. So we'll do an ink swatch here, and just look at that line. That is a very wide stub nib, 1.3mm stub nib, and it's a very juicy wet nib. So this is the Visconti Homo Sapiens Corsani 90, and it's a 1.3mm stub nib, and it's a 23 cat palladium nib. I just love how that nib writes. And I love the colour as well that comes out in this ink. So the ink here is Diamine Majestic Purple. Now, I just want to show you the difference here. This is Diamine Majestic Purple, and this is Diamine Majestic Purple. And you can see it's two very different purples. It's the same ink. They've been inked up from the same bottle of ink. But it just goes to show what happens when you use a very wide, very super wet stub nib compared to a fine nib. So if you're not liking a particular colour or shade of ink, try it in either... If you're in a narrow nib, try it in a broader nib. If you're in a broad nib, try it in a narrow nib, because you may actually sort of fall in love with that ink. The next pen is the Versconti Octagonal. So we'll do an ink swatch. Now this isn't as broad a nib, but it's not far off actually. This actually is a broad nib. It's not a 1.3mm stub nib. And for me, I find that this actually is quite wide. So this is a Visconti, and it's the Corsani Octagonal. So it's Octag, and it's 90 for Corsani, so Octagonal. And it's a broad 23 cat palladium nib, but honestly there is not a lot of line difference between these two. Like, you can see a little bit of line difference, but normally there's a lot more difference between a broad and a stub nib. And the ink in here this week is Pelican. Looks more like a D actually. Pelican, Edelstein, Topaz. Now, this is a broad 23 cat palladium nib, and this, I have to say, is the smoothest nib that I've ever had on a 23 cat palladium nib from Visconti. It is ultra smooth. The next pen is the Visconti Wall Street. So we'll do an ink swatch here. Now, this is again another stub nib, and you can just see that line width is insane. So this is a Visconti, and it's the Wall Street, and this is the limited edition version. And again, it's a 1.3mm stub nib, and it's a 23 cat palladium nib. Now, the ink in here today is Diamine, Aqua, Lagoon. And I have to say, I said that the Visconti Corsani Octagonal was the smoothest broad nib that I have ever had. I'd have to say that this Visconti Wall Street is the smoothest stub nib that I've ever had from Visconti. It's a beautiful nib to write with. The last pen is the Mythic Pens, the Aeschylus. So we'll do an ink swatch here. And this also is a broad nib. It's a Jovo nib though. But I do like Jovo broad nibs. So this is the Mythic, if I get that right, Pens, and it's the Aeschylus. So this is, I always get the spelling wrong on this, so Aeschylus. And it is a broad Jovo, and it's a still nib. And the ink in here today is Pilot, Iroshizuku, Konpeki, which is a really favourite blue of mine, although that Pelican Edelstein Topaz is really becoming my next go-to blue. So I think let's just go through these pens inked up one more time. We have the Bennu hexagon-b in a broad steel nib, inked up with Mont Violet. We have a Bennu Brielle Yolanda in a fine steel nib, inked up with Diamine Majestic Purple. We have a Bennu Minima Magma in a broad steel nib, inked up with Mont Red. We have a Visconti Camelot in a medium 18 karat gold nib, inked up with Mont Blanc Lavender Purple. We have a Visconti Jacques de Malay in a medium 23 cat palladium nib, inked up with Diamine Earl Grey. We have a Mont Extra 1930 Shiny Lines Dove in a medium 18 karat gold nib, inked up with Diamine Earl Grey. We have a Visconti Homo Sapiens Corsani 90 in a 1.3mm 23 cat palladium stub nib, inked up with Diamine Majestic Purple. We have a Visconti Corsani Octagonal, and this is in a broad 23 cat palladium nib, inked up with Pelican Edelstein Topaz. We have a Visconti Wall Street limited edition in a 1.3mm 23 cat palladium stub nib, inked up with Diamine Aqua Lagoon. And then we have a Mythic Pens, the Aeschylus, in a broad steel nib, inked up with Pilot Iroshizuku Konpeki. So that's my currently inked pens for this week. Thanks for watching. Please like, comment, subscribe, and I'll see you on the next pen video. Bye bye.